Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. If you recall, in the last session, we had been discussing family and the influence that family has on consumption behavior. And if you recall, we were also quite interested from the point of view of marketing as to why would we like to study a family, basically. And we had broken down the family into its various constituents to more logically understand how families consume during their life cycle. And the life cycle concept is related to the one that we had already discussed as product life cycle, which basically means that everything starts from a basic point, grows, and then declines. And it's the same way with families. And the idea behind all our discussion at that point was that if marketers could actually understand where groups fall within the life cycle, they should be able to determine what kind of products or services would be required by these groups and segments. And if we can also assign a number to these groups, we should be very capable of exactly determining what kind of demands most probably we will have for baby pampers, baby milk food, for health services for children, for maybe old people. When they have retired, they have a different kind of lifestyles and they need different kind of products and services for them. What can they do? What is their life? What are their behaviors? All these things become very important when we are trying to study the influence of family and the way marketers look at family groupings. And that is why we also try and figure out what is a household and what is a family. And this was basically all the discussion that we had in the last session. And at that point, given all this, we had briefly covered the 4 or 5 groupings that we have. That is bachelorhood, then we have honeymooners, then we have a family with children. Then as children grow up, they leave the house, they go and get married themselves, and the original couple is only left together and their lifestyle changes, and then one of them most probably passes away. So he is alone or she is alone, and then they move to maybe the house of their son or daughter, and extended families start, and that is what we were discussing. And the important point that we were making was that from traditional to the current time, things have changed. And not so much in Pakistan, maybe, but internationally or in the Western world, there is a tremendous change in this family cycle. And the family cycles, or the way the families are grouped together, keep repeatedly changing, which is again another message that till to date, maybe Pakistan is more traditional, but it is not as traditional as it was, let's say, in 1960 or 1970. Changes are taking place in the family cycles in Pakistan also. Initially, we used to be living collectively in extended families with 3 or 4 brothers, their parents, and their children all together. Then people have started moving out because job opportunities now are available somewhere else. Initially, there was only one person working in the family. Now, in some families, even the wives are working, and brings change in their lifestyles. Who will take the children to the school? Who will take care of the children when they come back home? And there are so many changes. And every time this change takes place, it has a very significant impact on marketing, or on the products that are required, or the products that are in demand, or the services that will be required, and so on and so forth. For a simple example, you would see the daycare centers are becoming very popular these days because the husband is on the job, the wife is gone for a job, a child, let's say 3 to 4 years old, normally they are given to the child care centers where there are specialists who take care of the children, help them to grow, and also provide them the same kind of a setting which will be given by the families. And this is the change that we would like to see. But with this, another very significant fact, and I would like to remind you to go back to our lectures where we were talking about influences, and there we had mentioned the significant influence or the most important influence is the family, which is then followed by the social class. So today, our lecture will be totally dependent on or related to the understanding of the social class, what the definition is, how does it relate to the marketing, and what kind of influences are there. How would we try and measure the social class framework? What are the anecdotes, as we call them, kuch kahaniyan, which will help you understand why these things are critical from the marketing point of view. So from this point, we can now start the concept of social class. But before I go any further, social class does not have any connotation unless we look at something more than the word social class. Social class means a get-together of a group of people who are similar in certain behavioral frameworks. But from our point of view, from the marketing point of view, it is more important to understand that social class assigns a kind of a status to the individuals who belong to a social class. कहने का मकसद ये है कि when social class has to be seen, it has to be seen from the point of view कि एक क्लास में जो शख्स उस क्लास में फॉल करता है, उसकी सोशल स्टेटस और सोशल स्टैंडिंग क्या है in a community. Because from there we draw our conclusions as to what kind of products will be bought by this person, what kind of lifestyle will he show, what kind of behaviors will be his, because it is understandable that people who belong to the same social class will tend to behave in the similar manner because they have the concept of belongingness. So given this understanding that the social class has to be seen from broadly three angles. One is prestige, power that the person has, and his consumption patterns. So all these things put together gives the connotation of the social status that a social class member has. और अगर हम गौर से देखें तो social class, even though marketers जो हैं, they tend to put them in discrete segments. यानी कि they try and separate one class from another. But अगर हम social life के अंदर देखें, so this seems to be a continuum, which means there is a line that you can draw, and on one side you can put the lowest class, and on the other you put the highest level of social class, and people can be arrayed along this line in a continuum. So what basically it means is that even within the social class, there will be some people who will be considered at the bottom line, and some who will be considered at the upper level. And it is quite possible that the person of one social class who belongs to the upper level of that social class most probably will resemble the person who has been put in a higher social class but falls at the end of that continuum. So the problem, therefore, it comes about is that they are, though on a continuum, but marketing purposes ke liye, what we try and do is to understand their behaviors and to understand their value systems and to understand their attitudes. We try to put them in homogeneous groups. इसीलिए हम जब segmentation की बात करते हैं, which we have been discussing, because ultimately marketing is nothing else except segmentation, targeting the particular segment, and then positioning the product based on all that we have studied. And all that we have studied is basically how to satisfy a particular need, what kind of needs are there, how to communicate these needs to the market, and so on and so forth. So the logic is that these, these segments can be viewed as standalone, separate groupings, and they can be studied from those point of views in terms of what each groups require. The most important area in this section is that the definition that we have is that it is a division of members into discrete, distinct classes, so that each member who belongs to a class is definitely different, either higher than or lower than another class group. कहने का मतलब ये है कि किसी भी क्लास के अंदर अगर कोई स्टेटस है तो वो दूसरे क्लास से या ऊपर होगा या उससे नीचे होगा. Or this becomes a regular feature in our research and our understanding of this area. What is basically suggested in this condition is how we look at the social class framework, and why do we have to break it down into these groups? Here I would like to give you a small anecdote which will try and establish why people do it. And if you also look at some of the conditions that we have, it is very obvious that social class has an importance in life. मिसाल के तौर पे लोग चूंकि conspicuous होते हैं, their consumption is also conspicuous, it can be seen by other people, so people tend to follow those behaviors or those purchase frameworks which will help them to reflect their own class against another one. There was this friend of mine who used to be living in Peshawar, and one day I was visiting that person, and I went to his home for a cup of tea, and I saw in a cupboard there were some old antique crockery lying in his cupboard, and that was what I know is known as Gardiner crockery, which was actually produced somewhere in 1870, 1860 during the British times, and the Britishers had actually brought them to the northwest frontier, and during the Afghan wars at that point of time, they were available in the English community in and around Peshawar, which is now NWFP basically. So these things were lying in villages because people used to buy them at that point of time, so it was looked at. And I saw this in his home, and I was very interested and said, "What are you doing with this?" He said, "Well, this is my business." So I said, "What kind of business is this?" He says, "Well, I get a lot of people who come from Karachi and come from various other cities, and they buy these." So I said, "What do you do? How did you get about to this business?" He said, "Hua kuch nahi. I found these, and then somebody was visiting my home, and he said, 'Can I buy this?' So I said, 'Okay, you take this.' So he paid me some money. That gave me an idea, and I went to these villages, tribal villages, and in exchange for new, set of crockery, dinner set or something, I would get these old bowls or old plates or old dishes, and I brought them. And this became my regular business, and now I'm doing quite a lot of business in this area. So on my question, okay, why would people buy this? I mean, I can understand if somebody is a collector of antiques who might like to put them in some kind of a library or some kind of museum or someplace, why would they do it? So he came and gave me a very interesting information, which I like to share with you. He said, "Baat ye hai ki these, maine kaha, who buys them?" That was another question I asked, who buys them? He said, "Those people who have recently made a lot of money, और उनके पास पैसा तो है, लेकिन they cannot prove that they are from very traditional families." So I said, then he says, what they do is that they take these to their homes and put them in their drawing rooms or someplace, and when other people come, obviously रिश्ते आते हैं शादियों के लिए, or obviously one of the important consideration in families when they are marrying off is not only the money but also the family background. So वहाँ this kind of a reflection is given कि जी ये तो हमारे पुरानी family के हैं और ये हमारे आबाओ अजदाद के हैं, and so forth. That means a product is linked with a kind of status which people believe in old families who had a standing in life. So money is one class. Money is one method of suggesting the level or status you have. But prestige, which comes from certain items that you have in your home or you display, is also true. Therefore, it becomes very important for the marketers to understand कि कौन सी क्लास किस चीज को या किस प्रोडक्ट को अहमियत देती है, so that they can be used to put these things into the market. लॉजिक है कि उस शख्स के पास पावर ज्यादा होगी who has the power of purchase. So अगर इनकम ज्यादा है, तो since the freedom to choose belongs to that person, so obviously his power becomes higher, and that is what we normally refer to as the purchasing power. Another person who does not have that flexibility or choice, उसकी power उसी हिसाब से कम हो जाएगी. And this is one way of assessing a social class or the status that the person will have. Prestige, like I said, is another one. And prestige is related to recognition. And like I said, traditional families, old families, had more prestige than the families who are becoming rich but do not command that kind of prestige that old families had. So they try and use products and services which try and help them to reflect the same feeling to other people, because that is what we have. And obviously, the third factor is wealth. Now, try and understand the difference between wealth and income. We need to be able to be very clear on it. Income is something that you can spend your money on. That's part of it. But wealth is the resources that a person or a family has. और सोशल क्लास जो है इस चीज को रिफ्लेक्ट करती है. मिसाल के तौर पे एग्रीकल्चरल क्लास इज अ सोशल क्लास, लैंडलॉर्ड्स आर अ सोशल क्लास, businessmen is a particular class, and these people can demonstrate different aspects of income, wealth, prestige, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we have this very strong reflection for the marketers as to if they can understand a class and try and see whether in a particular area or region or a grouping or a geographical area, what class exists there, then it becomes much easier to present those products and services which is targeted to that particular class. इससे एक concept निकलता है which is very important, and that is known as social comparison theory. अब social comparison theory marketers काफी अरसे से इस चीज को जानते हैं because of our own conceptualization that every person tries to compare himself or herself with another person, and this comparison is normally related to or can be translated to in terms of this, again what I'm saying, social class or the status that the person has. For example, doctors and professors most probably have a different class than lawyers and agriculturists, like I've just mentioned. Or prestige ke hisab se, a doctor would have a different prestige framework against owner of a bus or a taxi owner. Maybe the taxi owner has more income than a teacher or a professor in a university with a PhD, but even then, this social class framework would obviously bring something more. Income se zyada prestige ka मामला हो जाएगा. तो जब ये चीजें आती हैं, it becomes very important to understand that the segment that you have, उसकी social standing क्या है, social status क्या है. इसीलिए हम social comparison theory के हवाले से बात करते हैं, और इसमें काफी importance है that every person tries to compare, और ये comparison भी दो तरह के होते हैं. One is to compare yourself with somebody who is at lower level. उसका मुहर्रिक क्या है? उसका मुहर्रिक है my self-esteem, my ego, and my ana, which means I try to look at the person below me and I say, oh, I'm better off than this person is. That's one method of handling it. And therefore, I will always buy products which are not bought by the lower class person because that is the gap I want to produce. और यही चीज मैंने एक दफा आपको एग्जांपल दी थी एक प्रोडक्ट की जिसमें glasses were or crockery or what do you call crystal glasses were concerned, and then it was targeted towards higher families, rich families for their children's dowry और उसके मामले में, और फिर marketing की वजह से that product became available to drivers, to the workers of a family, the maids, and everybody was buying it. And this class, the rich class, immediately stopped buying that product because there was a lack of comparison, or there was no more break between the two classes for the same use of the same product. So अगर वही product दोनों इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं तो class की जो distinction है वो ख़त्म हो जाए तो वो उस वक़्त वो चीज़ें acceptable नहीं होती classes के अंदर. This brings us to an important concept in this consumption behavior of social classes, and that is known as conspicuous consumption. Now, conspicuous consumption means that consumption which is seen by other people, which is conspicuous in its visibility. It's just like we know that in our own cultural frame, we know that people put so much of an effort during marriages कि वो डावरी हो या वलीमा हो या क्या नाम है शादी के अखराजात हों, लोग अपनी पहुंच से भी ज़्यादा खर्च करते हैं और उसकी वजह यह है कि दुनिया देखती है तो लोगों को जो चीज़ नज़र आती है उसी के बेस के ऊपर वो असेस करते हैं कि इस आदमी की क्लास क्या है. Therefore, this has become an ingredient which is very, very important in all kinds of research. और उसकी वजह यह है कि ये जो conspicuous consumption है, which is visible to other people, becomes a marker or a standard by which people judge where to put a person along the continuum. और इसी के बेसिस के ऊपर हम कहते हैं कि जो ग्रुपिंग्स हैं क्लास की वो समझ आती हैं. और इट्स वेरी सिंपल कि अगर एक lower class, जैसे मैंने कहा, a class person who looks downward does it because he believes that he is better off from the other person and he wants to distinguish himself from the other person. और वो चीज़ें चुनेगा जो lower class नहीं लेती और वो कोशिश ये करेगा कि वो चीज़ें ले जिससे उसकी क्लास upward mobility के तौर पे ऊपर जाती हुई नजर आए. Now उसी के हवाले से we come to this other conclusion that when we are doing this, conspicuous consumption leads us to the second factor where we try and compare ourselves with people of a higher level. And when we look at the higher grouping, then this is basically where you suggest targeting an ideal situation that you want or a person wants to achieve in terms of the social class status. और ये हमारी जिंदगी में हर जगह पे we can see this happening. The watch we buy, the clothes we wear, the car that we drive, all try, उसमें एक जो फैक्टर है वो रिफ्लेक्ट करता है हमारे conspicuous consumption को और वो दिखाने की कोशिश करता है कि ये फ्रेम है क्या. Then takes us to the dynamics of consumption, which basically suggests that consumption is not a static frame. And we all try and endeavor to shift our lifestyle or our consumption patterns to target a higher level. और उसका मकसद सिर्फ conspicuous consumption से है. इस हवाले से now we have to quote a few examples so that we can understand that this is not unique to Pakistan, because normally अगर हम देखें तो we normally have we criticize Pakistanis for conspicuous consumption, which means दिखावे के लिए हम चीज़ें करते हैं और अपने आप को मजबूरी में भी डालते हैं, प्रेशर में भी डालते हैं और उसकी वजूहात सिर्फ ये है कि दूसरे हमें एक खास स्टेटस दें. Now I am quoting two researches. One was done in Canada and the other was done in Australia. Both the researchers were related to two types of consumption. एक का ताल्लुक था कि हम कहते हैं स्टेटस कंजम्पशन क्या है, जिसका मतलब है कि हम अपने स्टेटस को जाहिर करने के लिए कुछ चीज़ खरीदते हैं एंड उसको हम इस्तेमाल करते हैं बिकॉज वी वांट टू रिफ्लेक्ट अ पर्टिकुलर स्टेटस. फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ आई बिकम अ मैनेजर इन अ बैंक, so my behavior would be to look at the other managers and try and buy those things which are bought by them so that I belong to that group of managers. On this other side is conspicuous consumption, where I try to buy only to project my lifestyle or my class from where I am to what I want to be. ये दोनों researches हुई in Canada as well as in Australia, और उसमें जाहिर ये हुआ कि जो स्टेटस कंजम्पशन होता है उस पे सेल्फ मॉनिटरिंग बहुत होती है. इसका मतलब है कि जो लोग इस टाइप ऑफ पैटर्न के कंजम्पशन में इन्वॉल्व होते हैं, दे वॉच एवरीबडी अराउंड देम एंड देन दे ट्राई टू डू एग्जैक्टली व्हाट द अदर पर्सन हैज डन. बट ऑन कंस्पिक्युअस कंजम्पशन द फ्रेमवर्क दैट हैज बीन डिस्कवर्ड इज कि कंस्पिक्युअस कंजम्पशन में लोग दूसरों से आगे बढ़ने की कोशिश करते हैं. So there is a distinction. In one case, we try and match the status of the social class that we assume to belong to. Conspicuous may we try and exceed even those people who belong to our own class to go to a higher level. Or with due respect to the ladies, it was even in Australia and Canada, it was found out that most of the time women were more involved in conspicuous consumption, whereas men were more related to status consumption. This has become a very distinctive feature, and इसीलिए we see the advertisements or the communications that we have or the media that we use, particularly in terms of promoting even refrigerators or even to the extent in Pakistan, if you recall, we have even seen what they call these foam mattresses targeting onto a marriage or a dowry or stuff like that to promote a particular aspect, which may be true, which may not be true, but that is what we do. And marketer को इसमें क्या फायदा है? The marketer tries to find कि कौन से फैशन की चीजें हैं, कौन से accessories हैं जो मुख्तलिफ क्लास के लोग इस्तेमाल करते हैं. Where are these classes located so that they can be marketed to the right people? Not only that, it also tries to suggest कि जब हम अपनी मार्केटिंग करें या कम्युनिकेशन चैनल्स डेवलप करें तो कम्युनिकेशन किस मीडिया के थ्रू की जाए. Now, the major areas that help us determine are basically four. One is your income, two, occupational status, academics or education, and basically income. These are the basic frames that we have to establish a particular social class. लेकिन social class जो है वो हमेशा जैसे मैंने कहा था clusters या segments के तौर पे देखे जाते हैं और इनके अंदर grouping होती है. और आइडिया ये है कि हर क्लास वो अगर कोई चीज खरीदेगा तो वो जो क्यू लेगा उसका या द इंफॉर्मेशन द वर्ड ऑफ माउथ दैट द पर्सन हैज विल बी ब्रॉट फ्रॉम दी सेम सोशल क्लास. सो एक और चीज जो कि इंपॉर्टेंट है हमारे लिए एज मार्केटर्स वो ये है कि जब सोशल क्लास के अंदर कंस्पिक्वस कंजम्पशन या स्टेटस कंजम्पशन का मामला है तो ये ज्यादातर वर्ड ऑफ माउथ के थ्रू और उसकी जो इन्हिसार है वो ज्यादा उसी पर है. वर्ड ऑफ माउथ इज वन ऑफ द मेजर क्लूज दैट वी हैव टू यूज व्हेन वी आर ट्राइंग टू बाय अ प्रोडक्ट फ्रॉम दी फॉर द पर्पसेस ऑफ ईदर एस्टैब्लिशिंग अ सोशल क्लास और अ स्टेटस और कंस्पिक्वस कंजम्पशन. तो हम इतना न्यूज़पेपर पे या एडवर्टाइजमेंट पे डिपेंड नहीं करते जितना वर्ड ऑफ माउथ पे करते हैं. लेकिन वी ऑल्सो ट्राई एंड सजेस्ट इन मार्केटिंग दैट all these behaviors relate to a particular class and जो चीज हम डिपिक्ट करना चाहते हैं हम उसी चीज के हवाले से खरीदते हैं. इस मामले में there is another example कि in Russia, for example, as an example I'm presenting to you, रशिया में एक कंपनी ने प्रोडक्ट लॉन्च किया और वो था 2-in-1 शैम्पू, विच मीन्स शैम्पू भी था और क्या कहते हैं उसमें कंडीशनर भी एक ही उसमें था. वी सी दैट 2-in-1 इज नॉर्मली अवेलेबल इन पाकिस्तान, बट जब रशिया टूटा तो there was a class of people who were considered to be pretty rich, and it was assumed that their behaviors would be reflective of the behavior of the western class जो उसी इनकम लेवल पे एक ही तरह की थी. तो इनकम को बेस करके उस कंपनी ने जब अपना प्रोडक्ट लॉन्च किया रशिया में so they found that this was purely a failure. There was nothing happening, no product, their product was not being sold. Up there was a confusion. Why? Because जो income group उन्होंने target किया था, तो उस income group में चूंकि जो associated behaviors थे या value systems थे या attitudes थे वो उन्होंने replace किए, जो western थे वो उन्होंने place करने की कोशिश की रशिया में. तो product started failing. When they carried out research for that particular income group as located in Russia, उनको पता चला कि औरतें ये क्यों नहीं खरीद रही. उसकी रीजन ये थी कि the women felt कि 2-in-1 is a product for a lower class in Russia because it suggested that they do not have the capacity or the purchasing power to buy 2 bottles. अगर आप गौर करें तो इसके अंदर कोई लॉजिक नजर नहीं आती, बिकॉज अगर आप 2 सेपरेट बॉटल्स खरीदें तो उतने ही टाइम में वो बोतलें खत्म होंगी जितनी आप 2-in-1 खरीद लें तो वो भी उतने ही में खत्म हो जाएंगी तकरीबन, मोर और लेस इन द सेम. सो इट वाज नॉट द क्वेश्चन ऑफ द नंबर ऑफ बॉटल्स दैट कैन बी बॉट और द नंबर ऑफ, व्हाट द इशू वाज दैट लेडीज वांटेड कि उनके बाथरूम में उनके क्या नाम है बाथरूम के अंदर 2 बोतलें पड़ी हों. दैट वुड सजेस्ट to their friends who will come and visit to them that these people belong to a higher social class. अब चीज जो लॉजिकल है वो ये है कि हालांकि इनकम ग्रुप्स दोनों अमेरिका या वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड में और रशिया में ये एक ही था, लेकिन उनके अपने वैल्यू सिस्टम्स थे और उनकी अपनी लॉजिक थी। इसी तरह से अगर हम देखते हैं प्रेस्टीज के हवाले से प्रोडक्ट्स को, जो मैंने आपसे कहा कि प्रेस्टीज इज अनदर फ्रेमवर्क वेयर पावर इज देयर एंड वेल्थ इज देयर, तो प्रेस्टीज के हवाले से अगर हम इंस्टेंट कॉफी को देखें तो इंस्टेंट कॉफी इन द सेम इनकम और सोशल क्लास ग्रुप इन फ्रांस एंड इन जर्मनी, तो उसके अंदर दोनों के जो अप्रोचेज हैं वो मुख्तलिफ हैं। मिसाल के तौर पे फ्रांस में जो इंस्टेंट कॉफी है और द सेम क्लास, लेट्स कॉल दैट क्लास ए क्लास, तो वहां इंस्टेंट कॉफी इज कंसिडर्ड टू बी अ ड्रिंक यूज्ड बाय लोअर सोशल क्लास पीपल। बट जर्मनी में आप चले जाएं और उन दोनों को अगर आप उसको भी ए क्लास ही बोलें, तो उनके हवाले से इंस्टेंट कॉफी इज कंसिडर्ड टू बी अ हाई क्लास प्रोडक्ट। तो इसमें एक लेसन भी है, वो ये है कि व्हेन वी लुक एट प्रोडक्ट्स और मार्केट्स, तो हम सोशल क्लास को एक मुल्क से दूसरे मुल्क में ट्रांसफर नहीं कर सकते। वी हैव टू फाइंड आउट द कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर क्लास इन दैट पर्टिकुलर एरिया एंड वी जस्ट कांट डू इट फॉर द सेक ऑफ आवर अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि हम किताब में पढ़ते हैं कि अमेरिकन सिस्टम के अंदर या उनके सोशल क्लासेस के अंदर ये बिहेवियर्स हैं एंड वी अज्यूम कि चूंकि हमारे अंदर भी अपर मिडिल क्लास लोअर क्लास की कैटेगराइजेशन है, तो हम कहें इनके भी बिहेवियर्स तकरीबन एक ही तरह के होंगे। Now, just like I was telling you about the categories, just I mentioned, we now need to look at what categories do we have by which marketers try to distinguish or the economists try to distinguish classes. Obviously, we should understand that these classes or these categories depend on the detail that a marketer or an economist wants. There are two categories only where we normally use the blue collar concept, which means basically those people who are artisans or who are skilled labor, they are considered to be people who are blue collar. And on the other side of the picture, we have the white collar force or lower upper class, which is more or less people who work on desks, including lawyers and including managers and all, they are considered to be white. This is a very basic, very broad. Then we have a three-class grouping where we have the blue collar, gray collar, the white collar, or the middle upper class. Now, again, we find that the blue collar or the gray collar are considered to be people who are basically at the lower end. Gray color is the people who, in our category, we might put in the terms of the supervisors or the clerks or the people who sit in the offices, assistant managers and all, and then white collar, which means they go up to the higher managerial level and so on and so forth. और इसके ये चूंकि managerial conceptualizations हैं, तो इसके मुकाबले में we have what we call the lower, the middle and the upper class. ये economic divisions हैं और दूसरी जो हैं वो जो blue, grey और white collar की हैं, ये occupational divisions कहलाती हैं. मैंने जैसे आपको पहले भी कहा, we have already seen it that we can break it down in terms of occupation, the income, the educational level, so and so forth. So वो उन चीज़ों को मद्देनजर रखते हुए we have also broken down the social classes. और इसमें जैसे मैंने कहा टू कैटेगरी में ब्लू एंड वाइट है और उसके मुकाबले में जो इनकम क्लास है वो है लोअर एंड अपर. थ्री क्लास ग्रुपिंग के अंदर जो ऑक्यूपेशनल है वो ब्लू, ग्रे एंड वाइट है और जो इनकम क्लास के हवाले से है वो लोअर, मिडल एंड अपर लेवल है. इसी तरह वी हैव व्हाट वी कॉल द फोर लेवल क्लास, व्हिच इज बेसिकली द लोअर क्लास, द वर्किंग क्लास, द लोअर मिडिल क्लास एंड द अपर क्लास. नाउ अगेन आप देखें तो ये डिटेल का सिर्फ फर्क पड़ता जा रहा है. पहले जो दो ग्रुप्स थे उनको हमने फर्दर तोड़ दिया, उनको 3 में किया, फिर उसको फर्दर तोड़ दिया और उसको हमने 4 में किया और 4 को तोड़ दिया तो 5 में वो चले जाते हैं. और अगर आप 5वां देखें तो यू शुड बी एबल टू सी इट्स लोअर क्लास, वर्किंग क्लास, लोअर मिडिल क्लास, अपर मिडिल एंड अपर. नाउ ये 5 कैटेगरीज हो गई. मकसद जो मैंने कहा उसका सिर्फ एक है और वो ये है कि हाउ मच डिटेल डू वी वांट टू पुट इन एंड हाउ ग्रुपिंग्स डू वी वांट, हाउ मच साइज ऑफ ग्रुपिंग्स डू वी वांट. जितनी हम उसको डिटेल में ले जाएं तो 5 से हम ले जाना चाहें तो हम उसको 7 में भी ले जाएंगे. तो मकसद सिर्फ ये है कि मार्केटर इसको किस वजह से इस्तेमाल कर रहा है. This is what we have broadly discussed. It's not a hard and fast rule. There is no categorization that has been accepted generally around the world. Economists and marketers use different categories. So we have these different categories. लेकिन अब सवाल ये है, इनको measure कैसे करते हैं? What criteria would you use to measure these groupings? Are there any frames which are exclusive, which can be really used and which will cover all the issues that one find in research? So the answer is no, it does not happen that way. There will always be some positive points and some negative points in the way we approach. And also it will also depend basically on the kind of detail that we are looking for when we are trying to understand or categorize or measure these levels. इस हवाले से the first measure that we normally have is what we call the subjective measure. अब subjective measure कैसे operate करता है कि you yourself ask the respondent कि वो अपने आप को किस कैटेगरी में फिट करने की कोशिश करता है, या उससे पूछा जाए कि in your opinion which class do you really belong to from the following 5 classes. First class is the lower class, the lower middle class, the middle class, the upper middle class and the upper class. और assumption ये है कि जिस आदमी से आप ये बात पूछ रहे हैं, he is very clear of his own social status. He knows where he belongs to. उसके बदले में you can also ask him his job. Like I said, do you hold a blue collar job or a white collar job or a gray collar job? And whatever distinction you have, people have already also tried to link up कि वो चंद jobs को कैटेगराइज कर देते हैं ब्लू में. तो जब वो जॉब्स की इंडिकेटर आते हैं तो वो जिसको टिक करेगा तो हमें खुद पता है कि ये अपने आप को किस क्लास में प्लेस कर रहा है. प्रॉब्लम ये है इस पर्टिकुलर फ्रेमवर्क में कि यहाँ बायसनेस आ सकती है. Two reasons it can happen. One is lack of awareness. The person does not really understand the categorization that the marketer has in mind or the economist has in mind, and he may not be on the same ground level where he should be able to respond exactly as what you want. और उसमें फिर प्रॉब्लम हो जाता है रिलायबिलिटी का. दूसरा है कि वो शख्स may try to change his status just to or for his ego esteem or for his self esteem के reasons की वजह से वो कोशिश करे कि वो अपने status ही को change कर दे. तो we find that there could be problems coming from that angle. तो second methodology जो है, और हम देखेंगे कि जब हम ये सवाल पूछते हैं तो उसमें मल्टी आइटम स्केल होता है या सिंगल आइटम इंडेक्स है. जो भी हम स्केल इस्तेमाल करेंगे उसमें भी कई पॉजिटिव पॉइंट्स हैं, कई नेगेटिव हैं. लेकिन जैसे मैंने कहा, जब भी हम मेजर कर रहे होते हैं तो हम नॉर्मली 3 या 4 डिस्टिंक्ट एरियाज को टारगेट करते हैं. और अगर आपने कुछ सर्वे डॉक्यूमेंट्स देखे हों तो जब पर्सनल इंफॉर्मेशन हम ले रहे होते हैं सोशल क्लास के हवाले से, तो उसमें इनकम भी होती है, ऑक्यूपेशन होती है, एजुकेशन होती है, रेजिडेंस कहाँ है होता है. ये सारी चीज़ें हेल्प अस टू स्पेसिफिकली लोकेट अ पर्सन इन अ पर्टिकुलर क्लास ग्रुप. बट जैसे मैंने कहा, जब आप किसी शख्स से खुद पूछें तो देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी दैट अ पर्सन ट्राइज टू प्रोजेक्ट his self image which may not truly reflect where he is in the actual. और इन चीज़ों को we need to be very careful when we are applying that. Second is when we talk about reputational scale. Now ये जो है थोड़ा सा impracticable है because reputational scales के अंदर social scientists normally इसको इस्तेमाल करते हैं to understand the social culture. कि वो पूछते हैं कि मिसाल के तौर पे आपके हिसाब से जिस कम्युनिटी में आप हैं तो वहाँ जो सोशल क्लासेस हैं वो कैसे डिवाइड की गई हैं, या आपके हिसाब में या आपके ख्याल में what is the division between the social classes, and then they try and find out to ask various about various people or various families कि आप इनको किस क्लास में प्लेस करते हैं. तो मकसद यहाँ मार्केटिंग का नहीं है. The idea is to be able to understand the social structure which exists within a social class or a community or a region or a area. So that's basically really not relevant from the marketing point of view. Marketing के अंदर जो third method भी इस्तेमाल किया जाता है वो basically कहलाता है objective measures. Objective measure के अंदर we actually ask not कि वो अपने आप को किस income group में डालता है in the shape of saying कि do I belong to a higher income group or a lower income group or a middle income group, but हम उससे डायरेक्टली पूछ लेते हैं कि योर सैलरी या जो फैमिली इनकम है वो किस ब्रैकेट में आती है, और फिर वी असाइन ourselves as marketing researchers कि ये जो ग्रुप है ये किस से ताल्लुक रखता है, बिकॉज ये हमारी जो बेसिक नॉलेज है उसको इसका बेस बना के तो हम इस्तेमाल करते हैं. So these questions that we have are normally related to asking where people live. Logic कहता है कि if I am supposed to be asked where I live and I say I'm living in defense, so the assumption is that I most probably have more income than the person who most probably is living in Georgetown. This itself is an indicator, and I said you to 4 things are normally requested or asked: income, occupation, education, as well as residence. Now, it's very simple to understand the logic of these things. अगर एक PhD है और आप पूछते हैं कि what is your educational background and somebody is taking PhD, on the other side you ask and the second person is taking MA, तो logic कहता है कि the PhD most probably is earning higher than the person who's got a master's degree. इसी हवाले से आप अगर गौर करें तो जब हमारे रिश्ते आते हैं फैमिलीज में, तो the first question that is normally asked is कि लड़का या लड़की कितना पढ़ी हुई है या पढ़ा हुआ है. मकसद क्या है कि यू आर ट्राइंग टू, इवन द फैमिली इज ट्राइंग टू यूज दिस एजुकेशनल फ्रेम टू डिटरमिन income status or the status that the person has in terms of prestige and so forth. और ये logic में acceptable है. And that is why we continuously suggest that segmentation techniques, one of the major ones is to assign social classes as particular segments. अब उसकी rational क्या है? अगर आप गौर करें थोड़ा सा, if we go backward, तो हमें पता है कि जब हम अपना प्रोडक्ट डेवलप कर लेते हैं और उसके लिए एक पोजीशनिंग कॉन्सेप्ट ले आते हैं जहन में, और हम उसके लिए यूएसपी तैयार कर लेते हैं, यूनिक सेलिंग पॉइंट तैयार कर लेते हैं, तो हम उस प्रोडक्ट के लिए जो टारगेट मार्केट है उसकी प्रोफाइल अपने जहन में बना लेते हैं, या वी राइट डाउन कि हमने ये प्रोडक्ट किस मार्केट के लिए तैयार किया. मार्केट के लिए जो तैयार किया, मिसाल के तौर पे इट कुड बी फॉर पीपल ऑफ एज 20 to 32 with income of, let's say, 50,000 rupees. Their educational level is master's in business administration. More or less, their job is located as bankers. When we have done this, तो इंसान चाहता है कि ये मेरा जो प्रोफाइल है should fit with the target market that I want, and I want to know where is this group of people living. ये जो हमने टेक्निक्स बताई हैं जो रिसर्च करने के हवाले से, तो जो प्रोफाइल वहां से निकलेगा तो हम इन दोनों को मैच कर लेते हैं. अब मुझे मालूम है कि ये जो ग्रुप है ये ज्यादातर कहाँ लोकेटेड है, या इनके जो रेजिडेंसेस हैं वो किस एरिया में हैं और किस एरिया में फैले हुए हैं, सो दैट व्हेन वी फाइंड द मीडिया we should be able to pick up that particular media which is more commonly available within a particular geographical location or a particular residential area and so on and so forth. So ये जो प्रोफाइलिंग है जिसमें मार्केटर अपनी प्रोफाइल तैयार करते हैं, रिसर्च करने के बाद हमें कंज्यूमर्स की सेगमेंटल प्रोफाइल्स मिल जाती हैं, और फिर जो जॉब रह जाता है वो इन दोनों प्रोफाइल्स को मैच करने का रहता है. और इसी में जो मीडिया ने अपनी प्रोफाइल बनाई होती है, मीडिया भी मिसाल के तौर पे अगर एक मैगजीन है, शी है, या CQ मैगजीन है, या लेट्स से न्यूज़ लाइन है, या व्हाटएवर द मैगजीन और जर्नल दैट वी हैव, तो उन्होंने भी अपने रीडर्स की प्रोफाइल बनाई होती है. नाउ अगर आप देखें तो ये तीनों बड़े कन्वीनियंट सिचुएशन पैदा हो जाती है कि हमें मालूम है कि मीडिया जो है वो पढ़ता कौन है, उसकी प्रोफाइल क्या है, हमारी अपनी मार्केट और प्रोडक्ट या ब्रांड की रिक्वायरमेंट के हिसाब से हमारे जहन में एक प्रोफाइल है जो हमने तैयार की हुई है, और फिर हमें सेगमेंट के हवाले से पता चल जाता है कि इस प्रोफाइल से मैच करता हुआ ग्रुप रहता किस एरिया में है या किस एरिया में लोकेटेड है, बिलबोर्ड कहाँ लगेगा, और वो कौन सा टेलीविजन देखते हैं. तो ये चार चीज़ें जब मिल जाती हैं तो हमारे पास एक बहुत अच्छा marketing tool established हो जाता है, which we then can apply more conveniently. Now this brings me to the last frame कि ये जो ये जो वेरिएबल्स हैं जिनको हम मेजर करते हैं, ये किस तरह से लोकेट किए जाते हैं, तो वी हैव बीन एबल टू suggest in research and in literature that there are two types. One is single item measures, और हम जिक्र कर चुके हैं, but now we will look at the detail and also look at कि उन measures का और उस measure की अहमियत क्या है. The second frame is multi-item measures, where it is a composite measure. That means ये 4-5 measures लेके या उनसे ज़्यादा लेके आप उनको एवरेज करके एक ग्रुपिंग तैयार कर लेते हैं, which actually tries to help the marketer to get a broader picture of the person that we are interested in or the target that we are interested in. Now let's take a look at these single item scales. मैंने कहा we have this occupation as one of the most important. We already suggested that the first question normally people after asking for education is कि ये अगर शादी के हवाले से हम बात करें, because that is a very common thing to be able to understand and relate to, तो पूछा जाता है कि बेटा काम क्या कर रहा है, which again is an indicator of the kind of income or status or prestige that the person will have in a society or in an environment. लेकिन marketer इसको कैसे इस्तेमाल करेंगे? Now let's just put a little bit of a hypothetical situation where we see that there is a group of occupation or a grouping of occupation which we might call, जो auditors होते हैं उनकी एक grouping है और वो एक occupation है. तो उससे क्या हासिल होता है? रिसर्च सजेस्ट करती है कि जब इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न्स फाइल हो जाती हैं तो नॉर्मली एटलीस्ट इन द वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड these accountants and auditors normally take a break. जब ब्रेक ली जाए तो what would be the most important service they will be looking for? तो रिसर्च अमेरिका में और वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड में सजेस्ट करती है कि the immediate service that they require is traveling services. Why? Because after the returns have been filed, अगर हम पाकिस्तान के हवाले से देखें तो नॉर्मली ये अगस्त सितंबर का पीरियड है, तो ये वो टाइम होगा फॉर दी फॉरेन पीपल कि ये छुट्टियों पे लोग जा रहे होंगे, और जब छुट्टियों पे ये जाएंगे तो नॉर्मली द सर्विसेज दे रिक्वायर इज ट्रैवल एडवाइस, दे विल रिक्वायर टूरिस्ट डेस्टिनेशंस, they might, and it is according to research that they book heavily for tourist, let's say cruises, which means ships के ऊपर let's say England से माल्टा आ रहे हैं, and so and so forth. So that becomes a very significant point for traveling. So this will become an important target market for travel agents. And logic says that the travel agents will try and promote their product and their brochures for this purpose at that point of time. Now, look at the area where education is important. We've already decided that prestige is suggested by the level of education that you have. A higher level education, a person with higher level would have more prestige in the environment, and that's understandable, and we do not have to go a lot of in details. और उसके साथ obviously link हो जाता है income का, कि जितनी तालीम ऊपर होगी उतना उसका income का भी opportunities भी उसके पास ज़्यादा होंगी. But now let's focus on the concept of income, because income is the place where actual purchase will take place. The income which is available for consumption is located in the area where you can determine कि जिस आदमी के पास ज़्यादा income है उसके पास opportunities for consumption are higher. This very important point is related to when I talk to you about conspicuous consumption and what is the distinction between wealth and income. Income is where conspicuous consumption can take place. Wealth is where future income can be generated, because we have stated that people tend to see income in two distinct groupings. One is, what is your family income, by which they try and understand कि आज कितनी consumption ये कर सकता है. But wealth as an indicator suggests, and that always, let me tell you, comes from assets. Because assets are those resources which are used to generate income. तो जब भी हम बात करेंगे एसेट्स की, तो जब हम किसी से पूछते हैं कि उसके पास एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड कितना है, या उसकी ओनरशिप कितनी है एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड की, या उसके पास बॉन्ड्स कितने हैं, या उसके पास स्टॉक कौन सा है, तो व्हाट वी आर लुकिंग एट इज बेसिकली वेल्थ which has been kept aside to generate income into the future. But we also ask कि महाना इनकम या मंथली इनकम क्या है या किसी भी फैमिली की ईयरली इनकम क्या है, उससे हम ये पता लगाते हैं कि व्हाट वुड बी हिज consumption pattern now. So wealth and income are two distinct features, and if there is good marketers, they will try and also forecast not what he can consume or the family can consume today, but they will also try and understand कि इनके साथ लॉन्ग टर्म रिलेशन कैसे हों, बिकॉज फ्यूचर में जो इनकम जनरेट होगी उसका साइज क्या होगा. सो वी हैव अ वे ऑफ प्रिडिक्टिंग द फ्यूचर इनकम दैट कैन बी एप्लीकेबल फ्रॉम द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ income itself and wealth. So we can use both the frameworks to be able to determine this. Now this brings us to the end of our lecture today. Just to remind you again that whenever we discuss all the things that we have been discussing, our basic idea is to be able to link ourselves with basically marketing and the application of marketing. You should not read or understand this topic or subject area as standalone social discussion, but from the point of view, how can the marketers use this basic concept, and how can we as marketers utilize these conceptualizations for the betterment or the purposes of marketing our products. What we have done today is to be able to understand the basic definition of what is a social class. We have understood or try to understand that it's a continuum, but marketers try to make it discrete. We've also tried to understand कि इसके जो characteristics हैं वो normally 3 तरीकों से check किए जाते हैं: prestige, power, and income or wealth. And then there are some measures which are linked with these 3 things area. जैसे मैंने कहा था, higher level of education is linked with higher prestige. More money or wealth is linked with power, because power suggests how much you can buy and how much you can consume. And there are definite implications for this. And I've given you 2 or 3 examples. With this, I come to the end, and we will continue with a little bit more detail in try to understand the composite systems of measuring these, what do you call, social classes. And we will then conclude before we take up the other topics. Thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz.